Around 1300 BCE, the people of Israel had lived as slaves in Egypt for 4 centuries. In that long suffering, they prayed for a leader who could free them from oppression. A child named Moses was born, chosen to become the leader Israel had been asking for, though at first he had no idea who he truly was. As a baby, he was raised inside the Egyptian royal household, under the rule of King Seti, who acted as his adoptive father. Seti favored Moses over his own son Ramses, which planted jealousy in Ramses' heart. That tension showed itself when both young men carried out their father's orders to fight the Hittites. In the heat of battle, Ramses nearly lost his life. But Moses stepped in and saved him. The rescue echoed a prophecy delivered by a palace priestess who had foretold that if either Moses or Ramses had his life saved, that person would one day become a leader. With Moses now the savior, the path to leadership seemed to open before him. Yet there was a problem. Moses had no royal bloodline, and he was not Seti's true son. And so their destiny began. This is Exodus, Gods and Kings. The next day, Seti received alarming news from his advisors. In Pithom, a center of Israelite labor, rumors of agitation and growing resistance were spreading among the Hebrews. Seti assigned Ramses to handle the unrest. Hearing this, Moses hurried to Ramses and offered to go in his place. He knew Pithom well. Its filth and squalor made it unfit for the heir to the throne. With that argument, Moses took the assignment. When he arrived, an ambitious official named Hagep greeted him. Moses explained his purpose. There was trouble here, and he had come to resolve it. He planned to gather the elders of Israel to learn what was truly happening, rather than rely on Hagep's claim that the Israelites were organizing an uprising against Egypt. One elder, a man named Nun, spoke up in protest. The Israelites, he said, did not seek rebellion. They only wanted to return to the land of Canaan promised by their God. Moses knew Canaan by reputation. Its people were said to be fiercer than the Egyptians. Intrigued by Moses and his knowledge, Nun asked him to introduce himself. Moses then revealed his identity. He was the son of Bithiah and the grandson of Horemheb. The admission stunned Nun. After that meeting, Moses received a message from Joshua. Nun was waiting for him in a quiet place. Moses went there immediately. It was there that Moses finally learned the truth about himself. He was not Egyptian by birth. He was a descendant of Israel. As a baby, he had been set adrift in a river to save his life, during a time when the kingdom of Memphis was actively eliminating Hebrew infants. His mother had no choice but to release him to the water, hoping he might live. By fate, Bithiah, a woman from the royal household who could not bear children, found him and adopted him as her own son. This revelation overwhelmed Moses. The shock, confusion, and anger rose all at once, and in that moment, he accidentally killed 2 of his own soldiers. Worse yet, without realizing it, his conversation with Nun had been overheard. The witnesses immediately reported everything to Hagep. When Moses returned from his duties, he went to see King Seti, who by then was gravely ill. Soon after, the king took his final breath, and the throne passed to Ramses, who was now crowned pharaoh. For a time, Moses served as his advisor. But one day, Hagep arrived at the palace and revealed Moses' true lineage to Ramses. At first, Ramses refused to believe it. Yet under pressure, especially from his mother, Queen Tuya, he summoned Miriam, who worked as a servant in the palace. Ramses demanded that she admit Moses was her brother. Miriam insisted it was not true. Ramses' temper rose. He threatened violence to force the truth. As he raised his sword, Moses stepped in to protect Miriam, and in doing so, exposed the truth. Miriam was indeed his sister. The punishment was immediate. Moses, Miriam, and Bithiah were expelled from the kingdom and sent into exile. During the long journey away from Egypt, Moses made a difficult decision. He separated from his adoptive mother and from Miriam, choosing instead to go off on his own and find a new life. His path led him to the land of Midian. There the people were astonished to see him. The sword he carried marked him as a high-ranking Egyptian commander. They brought him to Yitro, the most respected elder of the region. From that meeting, a bond formed, and eventually Moses married Yitro's daughter, a woman named Zipporah. After washing and trimming his beard, Moses prepared to step into a new chapter of his life, ready to celebrate his wedding with her. The next day, the wedding ceremony was held. It was a joyful celebration, filled with warmth and love between Moses and Zipporah. Time passed, and 9 years later, Moses had built a peaceful life in Midian. He now had a son named Gershom, and he worked as a shepherd in the quiet hills. But there was one place near his home that always drew his attention. A mountain the Midianites called the Mountain of God, known today as Mount Sinai. It was a sacred place that no one dared to approach. Yet for reasons he could not explain, Moses felt called to go there. So one day he gathered his courage and climbed the forbidden mountain. Heavy rain triggered a landslide, and Moses was buried beneath the earth. In that moment, he encountered a divine messenger, appearing in the form of a young boy. The messenger brought a command from the Creator. Moses was chosen to lead the Israelites and free them from slavery in Egypt. The vision left Moses terribly ill. Seeing the true form of an angel overwhelmed his body, but in time his strength returned, and he accepted the mission placed upon him. This meant leaving his wife and son behind. It was a difficult choice, but he knew it was a responsibility he could not refuse. After a long journey, Moses arrived back in Egypt. He was welcomed by Nun, Joshua, and his brother Aaron. His purpose was clear. He had returned to free Israel from the oppression of the new pharaoh, Ramses. It was the first time the two had seen each other since Moses' exile. Moses stated his demand. He asked Ramses to release the slaves, for the suffering under Egyptian rule had become unbearable. Many had died from exhaustion and cruelty. Ramses saw this as an act of rebellion. He ordered his officials to hunt down Moses and his family. Soldiers raided the homes of the Israelites, murdering anyone connected to Moses in hopes of forcing him out of hiding. But instead of weakening them, this brutality had the opposite effect. One by one, the Israelites stepped forward, offering themselves to stand with Moses. He began training them, teaching archery, horseback riding, and swordsmanship. It took months, but eventually they were ready. They formed a plan to strike Egypt where it would hurt most, by destroying food storage sites. Under the cover of night, they launched the attack. Ramses responded swiftly and ruthlessly. His forces burned Israelite homes and slaughtered many innocent lives. Moses could only watch, powerless to stop the devastation. Then a message came from above, a warning of 10 plagues that would fall upon Egypt. The first began with the Nile River turning red like blood. Fish died, the water stank, and no one could drink from it. Soon after the first plague, a second disaster struck. Thousands of frogs rose up from the Nile and spread across the entire land. Homes, markets, and even the palace were filled with them. When the frogs eventually died, their bodies drew swarms of flies and maggots, filling the air with disease. Then came another affliction. Painful skin diseases spread throughout Egypt, and even Ramses himself was not spared. But despite these events, the ruler of Egypt remained unmoved. Instead of relenting, he responded by forcing the Israelites to work even harder. Another plague followed. A deadly disease swept through the livestock, killing cattle, sheep, and even the prized horses of Ramses. Yet the suffering continued. A violent hailstorm shattered homes and fields, leaving devastation in its path. The next morning, a new terror arrived. Clouds of locusts darkened the sky and devoured every remaining crop. Egypt faced starvation. The palace advisors begged Ramses to release the Israelites and share the royal grain supply to prevent total collapse. But driven by pride and greed, he refused. Hunger spread. Desperate citizens raided food storehouses, and chaos erupted throughout the kingdom. Fires broke out, destroying what little remained. Still, Ramses held his ground. His arrogance grew until he believed he himself was a god. Then the final warning came. Moses was told that one last plague would fall upon Egypt, the death of every firstborn child, from the poorest family to the royal household. To protect the Israelites, Moses instructed them to sacrifice a lamb and mark their doorways with its blood, so the disaster would pass over their homes. That night, a deep darkness swept across Egypt. One by one, the firstborn children died, including the young son of Ramses. The grief was overwhelming, and at last Ramses gave in. He ordered that the Israelites be released. After 400 years of slavery, the people of Israel were finally free. They began their long journey following Moses toward the promised land of Canaan. The journey took them across harsh desert terrain. But as they traveled, one of the men spotted something in the distance. The Egyptian army was advancing, led by Ramses himself. 3,000 to 4,000 soldiers, including 1,000 war chariots, were heading straight for them. Moses knew they could not win in battle, so he quickly changed their route, guiding the people toward a narrow mountain pass. The path was too tight for the Egyptian chariots to follow. Moses and the people of Israel continued their journey until they reached the shores of the Red Sea. But now they were trapped. In front of them was the vast ocean, and behind them, the army of Ramses was closing in quickly. In that desperate moment, Moses prayed for guidance. He pleaded for help, but for a long time there was no answer. Frustration and fear overwhelmed him, and he threw his sword toward the sea. And then something extraordinary happened. The waters in front of him began to divide. opening a path across the seafloor. Moses realized that this was the sign he had been waiting for. Without hesitation, he ordered the people to cross. Behind them, Ramses saw the passage through the sea and drove his army forward to continue the pursuit. Moses and Joshua stayed behind for a moment, holding the line until every last Israelite had crossed safely. Once they were clear, Moses told Joshua to leave him. Suddenly, the waters that had parted began to surge back. A massive wave rose and crashed down. Ramses and his soldiers were caught in the sea, unable to escape. The army was swept away beneath the waves. Ramses survived, but he lost everything. Moses, meanwhile, continued to lead the people forward. Their journey was not over yet. Before reaching the promised land, Moses brought them to Midian, where his wife and child still lived. There they rested for a time. Soon Moses was called once more to Mount Sinai. This time he was given a task that would shape the future of his people. He was to write down the 10 commandments, laws, and principles given by God, which would become the foundation of the covenant between Israel and their Creator. Years passed. Moses grew older, but he remained faithful to his mission. When the time was right, he once again led his people toward the land that had been promised to them, guiding them to their future and their new life as a free nation. So the moral of the story is sometimes doing the right thing will cost you more than anyone will ever know. But real love means choosing sacrifice even when your heart is breaking.